I was standing in the grocery store last Tuesday, just a regular Tuesday, and I looked at my cart and thought, when did everything get this expensive? Not in a panicked way. Just that quiet realization that something has shifted. And I started thinking about all the things I used to buy without thinking twice. Olive oil. Canned tomatoes. A bag of rice. Stuff I assumed would always be there, always be affordable. And now I'm doing math in my head every single time. So I went home and I did something I hadn't done in a while. I really looked at pantry staples, not just prices, but what's happening with supply, with imports, with the brands I've trusted for years. And what I found surprised me. Some of it genuinely made me uncomfortable. There are 12 pantry items I want to talk to you today. Some of them you probably have right now. Some of them you stopped buying because the price crept up and you didn't notice when it happened. And one of them, number 7, I did not see coming at all. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. But I'll say this, it's something most people buy every single week without thinking, and the situation around it is changing faster than almost anyone is reporting. If you're new here, please subscribe before we get into this. I put out content like this every week, practical, grounded, no hype. Just things worth knowing before everyone else figures it out. Let's get into it. Item 1. Extra virgin olive oil. I want to start here because this one has a long story and most people only know the end of it. Olive oil prices have been climbing for over 2 years now. And yes, a lot of people noticed when the bottles got more expensive. But what most people don't know is that the price pressure isn't over. It's just paused at a new, higher floor. Southern Europe, especially Spain and Italy, has been dealing with consecutive years of drought and extreme heat. These are the regions that produce the majority of the world's olive oil. The trees themselves take years to recover from climate stress. You don't just get a good rain season and bounce back. The root systems and fruit cycles are disrupted for years afterward. I looked into this after I noticed my usual brand, something I had been buying for under $10, had quietly crept past 14 and then past 16. I thought it was temporary. It isn't. When I checked data from agricultural commodity trackers earlier this year, olive oil was still trading near historically high levels. Retail prices lag behind commodity markets, which means we may not have felt the full effect yet. What I started doing is buying one extra bottle every few months when I find it on sale. Store brand options have actually held up reasonably well in taste tests. And for high heat cooking where the flavor doesn't matter anyway, I've switched to avocado oil, which has been more price stable. The practical move here is simple. If you see olive oil at a price that feels fair, buy 2. The window where it feels affordable is real, but it doesn't last long. You don't want to be in the position of rationing olive oil while you're trying to feed your family. That sounds dramatic until it happens. Item 2. White rice. Rice feels like the most boring thing to talk about. That's exactly why I'm bringing it up. White rice is the most consumed grain on Earth. It is the foundation of food security for billions of people. And it is quietly becoming a pressure point in American grocery budgets in a way that doesn't get nearly enough attention. In 2023, India, the world's largest rice exporter, restricted exports to stabilize its own domestic supply. That sent ripples through global markets. The situation has shifted since then, but the underlying vulnerability remains. When major producing countries face pressure, they restrict exports. And we feel it. I talked to someone who manages purchasing for a regional grocery chain, not a huge name, just a regional player, and they told me that bulk rice pricing at the wholesale level has been inconsistent. Some months it's fine. Other months there's a quiet premium that doesn't get explained to customers. At home, I have about 30 pounds of white rice stored in sealed containers. I'm not a prepper. I just know that rice stores for 25 to 30 years under good conditions and costs almost nothing per meal. A 20-pound bag from Costco right now gives you hundreds of servings. The takeaway is this: rice is the single cheapest form of food security you can buy. A few bags stored properly cost almost nothing and provide an enormous cushion. Even if prices double, which is possible, the starting cost is low enough that stocking up now still makes sense. This is the kind of item where doing nothing feels fine until the day it doesn't. Item 3. Canned tomatoes. Here's one I didn't expect to feel strongly about, but I do. Canned tomatoes, whole, diced, crushed, paste, are one of the most versatile pantry items you can own. They go into pasta sauces, soups, stews, chilies, braises. They are a foundational ingredient in cuisines across the world. And the price trajectory has not been friendly. Tomato crops in California, which supply a huge percentage of the canned tomatoes sold in the United States, have been hit by weather volatility and water restrictions. Processing costs have gone up. Tin prices have risen. And all of that has been pushed forward into the retail price slowly and steadily in a way that most shoppers absorb without noticing. What I noticed is that the store brand 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes I used to buy for under $1 has crossed the $1.50 mark at most stores I shop at. That doesn't sound like a lot until you think about how many cans you go through in a year if you cook regularly. The brands themselves are also quietly downsizing. Some cans that were 28 ounces are now 26.5 or 27. Same label, slightly less product. I started checking the net weight on the back and it made me annoyed in a way I hadn't expected. My move. I buy a flat of canned tomatoes whenever the price dips below what feels like a baseline. I've stocked about 3 or 4 months' worth at a time. They last for years and I use them constantly. This is one of those items where buying ahead just makes mathematical sense. If tomatoes are a regular part of how you cook, this one is worth acting on now. Item 4. Dried beans and lentils. I used to walk past the dried beans aisle without stopping. I grew up eating canned beans. I didn't think much about it. Then I started actually cooking with dried beans and I felt like I had been missing something obvious for years. Dried beans and lentils are one of the most nutrient-dense, protein-rich, long storage foods available at any grocery store. A 1-pound bag of dried lentils costs somewhere around $2, cooks up into many servings, and stores for 5 to 10 years in a sealed container. The math is almost embarrassing compared to most proteins. But here's the thing I want to highlight. Beans and lentils are now getting caught in the same inflationary currents as everything else. Shipping costs, agricultural input prices, packaging, it all adds up. And unlike olive oil or coffee where people expect premium pricing, beans are still perceived as a cheap staple. So when the prices move, people don't stockpile. They just grumble and move on. I spoke to someone who works at a bulk food distributor, a small company that supplies restaurants and co-ops, and they said demand for dried legumes has increased significantly in the last 2 years. More people are cooking at home. More people are looking for protein that doesn't cost as much as meat. That increased demand is putting pressure on supply chains that were sized for a different reality. My recommendation is to build a rotation. Buy a few different types: black beans, pinto beans, chickpeas, green lentils, red lentils. Store them in sealed jars or food-grade buckets. Rotate through them as you cook. The cost per meal is almost nothing and the nutritional value is significant. This is one of those items where acting now costs almost nothing but the long-term payoff is real. Item 5. Canned fish, sardines, tuna, salmon. I know. Sardines. Bear with me. Canned fish is having a moment. I don't mean that in a trendy food blog way. I mean it in a practical, prices are changing and you should pay attention way. Canned tuna has already gone through one price cycle in recent years. Overfishing concerns, fuel costs for fishing fleets, and processing costs have all pushed prices up. Canned salmon, especially wild-caught Alaskan, has seen significant price pressure because the underlying commodity is genuinely constrained. Sardines are the one I want to focus on because they are nutritionally extraordinary and still relatively affordable, but that window is closing. Sardines are high in omega-3 fatty acids, calcium, vitamin D, and protein. They are one of the few fish that are genuinely sustainable because they reproduce quickly and are low on the food chain. Nutritionists and dietitians have been recommending them for years. The mainstream population is slowly catching on. When mainstream demand meets a supply chain that was sized for a niche market, prices go up. It has already started. Brands that were selling at $2 a can are now at $3 or $3.50 in many stores. That's a meaningful jump. I started keeping a case of sardines, a case of canned salmon, and 2 or 3 cases of tuna in rotation. I eat canned fish 2 or 3 times a week. The cost per meal is well under $2 and the nutritional profile is hard to beat. If you've dismissed canned fish, I'd encourage you to try a few formats, packed in olive oil, with hot sauce, mixed into a grain bowl. The experience is different from what most people expect. Stock up now while the pricing is still reasonable. In another year or 2, canned sardines may start to feel like a premium purchase. Item 6. Flour, all-purpose and bread flour. Flour is one of those items that feels so basic it's invisible. You don't think about it until you need it and the price on the shelf makes you stop. The wheat market has been volatile since 2022 and it has not fully normalized. There are structural reasons for this: growing regions under weather stress, shipping route disruptions, input cost increases for farmers, and the effects continue to ripple through at the retail level in ways that are easy to miss because flour is sold in big bags that seem affordable until you do the math over a year. What I've noticed is that the quality conversation around flour has gotten more complicated. Some brands have quietly changed their flour blends, adjusting protein content, changing sourcing, without updating their packaging in any obvious way. Home bakers who've been using the same brand for years sometimes notice that their bread doesn't rise the same way or their pastry texture has changed. The product technically meets its label, but something has shifted. I started paying attention to this after a baking project that didn't turn out right. I did some research and found a consistent thread in home baker communities about subtle formula changes. This is not a scandal. It's just the reality of manufacturers managing costs. The practical move is to buy a larger bag, a 10 or 25-pound bag, from a warehouse store when flour is at a price you're comfortable with. Store it in an airtight container and it will last for a year or more. If you bake bread regularly, consider keeping both all-purpose and bread flour on hand. Flour is cheap enough that buying ahead costs almost nothing, but having it when you need it, and at the price you expect, matters more than most people realize. Item 7. Cooking oils, vegetable, canola, sunflower. Here it is. Number 7. I told you to wait for it and I meant it. Cooking oils, the everyday kind that most households go through without thinking, are in a complicated position right now and it is not being covered the way it should be. Here's the background. Sunflower oil, which is a major input for vegetable oil blends sold under various names in American grocery stores, saw a massive supply disruption starting in 2022. Ukraine is one of the world's largest sunflower oil producers. That supply was disrupted and the market scrambled to replace it with palm oil, soybean oil, and canola. That scramble raised prices across the board and changed the composition of many blended oils without significant consumer notice. The blending situation has partly stabilized. But here's what hasn't. The underlying cost structure for all these oils remains elevated. Soybean crops have faced pressure in South America. Canola production in Canada has been affected by weather. Palm oil has its own geopolitical and environmental pressures. What this means at the grocery store level is that the large jug of vegetable oil you buy, the one that feels like it should be cheap, has quietly become a meaningful budget line. And the composition of what's inside may be different from what it was 3 years ago, even if the label looks the same. I looked at the oil section at 3 different stores last month and compared what I found to what I remembered paying. The increase is real. The 48-ounce jug that used to be $3.50 is now pushing $5.50 or $6 in some places. That's a 50 to 70% increase from a few years ago. My approach has been to diversify away from blended vegetable oils for most cooking. Avocado oil has been consistent in price and is genuinely good for high-heat cooking. Coconut oil stores well and is useful for certain applications. For budget-conscious day-to-day use, store-brand canola is still the best value, but I buy it in larger sizes when it's on sale and store it in a cool, dark place. This is one to watch. The oil market is not as stable as the calm shelves suggest. Item 8. Honey. Honey is one of those purchases where I didn't think much about sourcing or pricing until I started looking into it, and now I can't stop thinking about it. The first thing to know, most of the honey on American store shelves is not what the label implies. Ultrafiltered honey, which is the most common type found in squeeze bears and large discount containers, has often been processed to the point where it contains little or no pollen. That matters because pollen is how you verify origin. Without it, there's no way to confirm where the honey came from, and importing of mislabeled honey from overseas markets has been documented repeatedly by investigative journalists and government agencies. The second thing, genuine domestic honey production is constrained. Bee colony health has been a serious concern for over a decade. Colony collapse disorder, pesticide exposure, habitat loss, these are real pressures on the beekeeping industry. Domestic honey production hasn't kept up with demand for years. What this means practically is that good honey, real, traceable, domestic honey, has gotten more expensive. The cheap stuff is holding its price, but the quality conversation has shifted in ways that matter if you're using honey for its actual nutritional properties or if you care about what you're eating. I switched to buying local honey in larger quantities. Farmers markets, local co-ops, direct from beekeepers. The price is higher per ounce, but the product is traceable and real. I buy a few pounds at a time when I find a source I trust and I store it at room temperature where it keeps indefinitely. If you use honey regularly, this is worth a few minutes of research to find a reliable local source. And if you're buying it for the pantry as a long-term shelf item, raw or minimally processed honey is the better choice for both quality and storage. Item 9. Canned broth and stock, chicken, beef, vegetable. This is one that surprised me when I really looked at the numbers. Broth and stock are staple pantry items for anyone who cooks. They go into everything: soups, risottos, braises, sauces, grain cooking. And the shelf-stable carton or conversion is something most households buy regularly without thinking much about it. What I noticed is that the major brands, the ones with the yellow and red labels that have been in American kitchens for generations, have been quietly shrinking their containers while holding prices or raising them. The 32-ounce carton is still 32 ounces. But the 48-ounce option has quietly disappeared from some shelves, replaced by a 32-ounce at a price that is not proportionally lower. Sodium content has also been an issue. Some brands that repositioned as low sodium or organic have used that as cover to raise prices significantly, sometimes to the point where the premium makes little sense nutritionally or financially. I looked at this after a recipe called for 4 cups of chicken broth, and I realized I was reaching for a product that cost more than I expected for something I went through every week. The practical solution I landed on is making broth from scratch in batches. I save chicken carcasses and vegetable scraps in the freezer. Every few weeks, I run a big pot of broth and freeze it in 1-cup increments in silicone trays. The cost is essentially zero since the inputs are food waste. The flavor is dramatically better. And I always have it on hand. If that feels like too much effort, buying in bulk from a warehouse store brings the per ounce cost down significantly. Look for the plain label versions without the organic or artisan premium. In blind taste tests, they perform similarly and the savings are real. This is one of those items where a small habit change saves meaningful money over a year. Item 10. Pasta, dried semolina. Pasta is supposed to be the fallback. The thing you eat when nothing else works. The $2 dinner that always saves you. The prices have moved. Not dramatically. Not catastrophically. But enough that it's worth paying attention. Semolina wheat, the high-protein durum wheat used in Italian-style pasta, has been under supply pressure. The growing regions in Italy and the American plain states have had inconsistent harvests. Global wheat markets in general have not been stable, and semolina specifically trades at a premium to regular wheat, so it absorbs those shocks more sharply. In stores, the effect is visible if you're looking. The store brand pound of spaghetti has moved from 70 or 80 cents to over $1 at many retailers. The name brands are at $2 or more. That's a real increase on a staple that many families depend on for affordable weeknight meals. I also noticed something when I was comparing brands at the store. Some budget pastas have shifted from semolina-based formulas to blends that include regular soft wheat or even wheat flour. This changes the texture and the glycemic profile. It's not necessarily harmful, but it's different from what you might be expecting. My approach is to buy pasta in larger quantities, a 12-pack or more, from warehouse stores or when it goes on sale. I look for pasta that lists semolina or durum wheat as the first and only ingredient. Store it in a cool, dry place and it keeps for 2 years or more easily. When pasta stops being the cheap option, something important has shifted in the grocery economy. We are not there yet. But buying ahead at today's prices still makes sense. Item 11. Apple cider vinegar and white vinegar. This is one I didn't include in my original mental list, and then I went to the store and looked at the shelf and changed my mind. Vinegar has quietly gotten more expensive. White vinegar, the gallon jug used for cooking, cleaning, canning, and a dozen other household purposes, has moved up in price more than most people have tracked. It's still not expensive in absolute terms, but the percentage increase is real and the uses are so broad that it deserves attention. Apple cider vinegar is in a different category. The market for it has bifurcated. On one end, there are low-cost filtered versions that have held price reasonably well. On the other, the raw, unfiltered, with the mother versions, the ones most people buy for health reasons, have seen consistent price increases and supply inconsistency. The reason is partly demand. Interest in fermented foods, gut health, and natural remedies has driven up demand for quality apple cider vinegar significantly. Bragg, the dominant brand in this space, has seen its prices climb steadily. Generic versions have appeared, but the quality gap is real and noticeable. I keep about 4 gallons of white vinegar and a gallon of quality apple cider vinegar in my pantry. White vinegar has an indefinite shelf life and the utility is enormous, from canning to cleaning to cooking. Apple cider vinegar stored in a cool, dark place is good for many years. If you use either of these regularly, buying an extra jug or two now is an easy, low-cost move that future you will appreciate. This is also one of those pantry staples that tends to get forgotten until you need it urgently, and then the price feels like a surprise. Item 12. Oats, rolled and steel cut. I want to end with oats because I think they represent something important about where food value and nutrition intersect in 2026. Oats are extraordinary. They are cheap per serving, nutritionally dense, versatile across sweet and savory cooking, high in soluble fiber, genuinely filling. If you were designing a pantry staple from scratch, you design something that works like oats. And yet oat prices have quietly moved. The large canister of rolled oats that felt like almost nothing to buy has noticeably increased over the past 2 years. Oat crops in Canada and the Northern Plains states, the primary growing regions, have been affected by drought conditions. Processing costs and packaging have added further pressure. Steel-cut oats, which are less processed and store slightly longer, have also gone up. And the flavored instant oat packets, which are mostly for convenience, have seen some of the most aggressive price increases relative to portion size. What I recommend is making the switch to buying oats in larger bulk quantities. A 10-pound bag of rolled oats from a warehouse store costs far less per ounce than any canister version and stores easily in a food-grade container for up to 2 years. If you like steel cut, buying in bulk saves even more. I cook oats several times a week. The cost per meal at bulk pricing is genuinely under 25 cents. That is one of the best food values available anywhere in the modern grocery store. Stock up on oats now. Not because there's a crisis. Just because they're excellent, they're affordable, and they will almost certainly cost more a year from now than they do today. That's worth acting on. Here's the pattern I want you to see across all of these items. We are not in a moment of dramatic shortages or sudden collapse. We are in something quieter and in some ways more important, a slow, steady repricing of the staples that used to feel almost free. The foods that made feeding a family affordable. The things you reached for without doing math. The people who will feel this most are the ones who are still shopping the same way they did 5 years ago, assuming the prices will stay flat, assuming the products will be the same, assuming there's always time to act later. The people who will feel it least are the ones who looked at this moment and made small, practical decisions. An extra bag here. A flood of cans there. A few jars of dried beans in the back of a shelf. Nothing extreme. Nothing scary. Just the quiet wisdom of being ahead of a trend rather than behind it. That's what this channel is about. Not panic. Not prepping in any extreme sense. Just being the kind of person who sees what's coming and makes sensible moves before the crowd catches on. If you found this useful, please subscribe. I put out videos like this every week. Things worth knowing. Things that help you make smarter decisions with your money and your household. Leave me a comment below telling me which item surprised you the most. I read every comment and I genuinely want to know what's landing for you. Next week, I'm looking at something that most people in this audience haven't thought about yet, a category of household products that is going through changes that will affect almost every family in America. I think you'll want to be here for it. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourself and your people. And I'll see you in the next one.